Shakespeare's Macbeth tell of the torturous futility of life, and the way every move we make and every syllable that rolls from our tongues leaves the world unchanged. Former works of colossal significance are reduced to background noise or a mere nuisance, and so Macbeth's heartache becomes similar to the fading love given to music. Simply falling for the whispers of today's melodies, only to be forgotten in the chorus of tomorrow, music has lost meaning where it once signified everything. Historically, music has had the power to stir souls and spur action, helping to build revolutions and create monumental change. Now, however, music has been banished from the foreground of our lifestyles. Whether it be to enhance the experience of a film or to provide a soundtrack to one's morning, listening to music as a standalone activity has become a rarity, as music's sole purpose is now to please and entertain. And yet, who decides what music is pleasant? What is entertaining? What standards do we use to define art? So you might be sitting there thinking, are there rules? And the answer is absolutely. Music, like any other art form, has no wrong answers. Except for when it has some wrong answers, there are certain unspoken rules and guidelines involved in creating an orally pleasing musical experience. Now, for those of you who are less familiar with music theory, there are 12 different tones used in Western music. An interval is the space between any two of these tones, and a scale is a group of 8 of these tones. Traditionally, Western major scales make use of 2 intervals of whole tones, followed by an interval of a half tone, and then 3 intervals of whole tones, followed by another interval of a half tone. And if that made no sense to you, that's alright, but it should sound something like... Chords are groups of notes, most often 3, played at the same time to create a certain colour in the music. There are major and minor chords, essentially happy and sad, and diminished and augmented chords, which are used less often because they don't sound as traditionally pleasant. Chord progressions are the building blocks of songs, with bass lines and melodies written around them. And there are predictable chord progressions as well, which include making use of the 1st, 4th, 5th, and 6th chords of the scale. Having said that, those are just the rules for Western music. Every culture has its own set of rules. For instance, Chinese music considers the interval of a perfect fifth to be heavenly. Additionally, where mainstream Western music makes use of measures of 4/4, traditional Turkish music makes use of 9-beat groupings, with this rhythmic structure woven into their cultural identity. Music that makes use of the techniques that society deems acceptable are continually considered pleasant. But do they bear any weight? Do they carry a meaningful message that may aid society? Not always. When these rules are followed beyond moderation, music tends to become boring and formulaic, often barely varying from song to song. People may dislike music that crosses these boundaries, but it's important to note that it's unproductive and perhaps unhealthy to cling to familiarity. So allow me to take you on a journey through several key Western musical movements. The early to mid-1800s found themselves to be an adventurous and explorative era for several composers, contrasting wildly with the reserved and elegant manner of the classical period just before. Bridging the gap between these eras was the legendary Beethoven, a pioneer in the Romantic era, which heralded the revival of patriotism and the creation of the nationalist movement, which allowed music to serve the purpose of unifying spirits. Smetana and Dvorak proved to be noteworthy names within this wave of nationalists, drawing inspiration from Czech folk tunes and the nature of their motherland in order to draw the artistic spotlight back to their country. Conversely, other composers in this era chose to write music to feed and elevate a listener's soul, to provide entertainment, so to speak. Inspired by Gluck's operas, where he seeks to enable catharsis in an audience, Romantic composers such as Berlioz and Wagner attempted to recreate this in their symphonies, unlike the compositions of yesteryear, which, pleasant as they were, lacked an outward sense of pathos. Now I am aware I've created a contradiction. I seemed to criticize music as entertainment when I began, and now I'm praising it? But it should be noted. The music of the 19th century was written to build happiness with intent, and so it was no longer mere diversion. Instead, romanticists brought forth purposeful art, saturated with emotion and humanity, elements of which could perhaps still be seen in the generation that would follow. See, the turn of the century marked the beginning of one of the most outspoken musical eras the world has seen yet. The delicately idealistic music of the Impressionists and the surreal new genres that began expressed such ethereal, ethereal, and creative tones and textures, and perhaps contributed to what would eventually become the popular subcultures of modern 21st century music. Refusing to draw a line between the art forms, composers of the 20th century questioned the divides between song and speech, music and the performing arts. They did this in a number of innovative ways, which included throwing visual arts and architecture into the mix. They did away with the old rules that seemed set in concrete, often throwing caution, traditional structure, and tonality to the wind. Music became more introspective, with heightened concern for symbolism within the music, forcing a listener to elevate their perspective from passive consumption to introspective critique. Rigid classification between styles of music began to blur and fuse to form new genres, the genres we may recognize today. Most notably, jazz and blues were formed of the merger between traditional African rhythms and styles and Western music. A movement piloted by the African American community, jazz was initially looked down upon, but as the 20th century progressed, it gained popularity, possibly as a result of it being explored by George Gershwin, helping to bridge the divide for those opposed to slave music. Composers of the 20th century were also more open to using new techniques and styles to compose. For example, 12-tone music was a notably jarring compositional practice, which involved writing with matrices in order to evaluate and analyze one's options within the music, without without giving specific importance to any tones in the scale. Similarly, minimalism began to emerge in the 30s. Some say it's barely music, as it lacks the traditional structure and melody that we are so comfortable listening to, yet it is such a pure form of art as it blurs the lines of entertainment and forces introspection and critique. Now, following on from this period, well, some would know it as the swinging 60s, the rich beginnings of rock and roll, the glory days of The Who, Hendrix, and Dylan. Demanding change and peace, musicians of this period quite intent on breaking rules and encouraging rebellion. And so it doesn't come as a shock that many of our musical idols made use of psychedelic and mind-altering drugs to enhance their creative abilities and gain perspective. This resulted in the subculture of psychedelia, with popular bands in this movement including the Beatles and Pink Floyd. Music in this era was stylistically drenched with whimsy, thick with reverb and frenzied instrumentals. Musicians also began experimenting with non-Western musical instruments and techniques and electronic production. For instance, Volume 2 from the Beatles' 1966 album Revolver was dominated by Indian instrumentals, after George Harrison worked with and learned from my teacher, the late Carnatic legend Sri Satyalingam, and several others from the Asian Music Center. Now, psychedelia has strong ties to the flower power era. Crying out for individuality, world peace, and down with the bourgeoisie in a world taken with the idea of equality, psychedelic music created unity. In a period heavy with the fight for justice, music was once more buried at the heart of the state. Music, through centuries and across cultures, has had the power to to manipulate emotions and alter minds. It appeals to the unadulterated passion within us, and it's constantly judged by the extent to which it pleases us. And since enjoyment is entirely subjective, the respect and appreciation that we give the music becomes varied. To listen closely, with no inhibitions, and an open mind, is to learn and to grow. To connect with the creator on an energetic level and to understand. When we analyze the intricacies within the music, as one may analyze the diction in poetry, the noise begins to fall away, and the core meaning is more intimately conveyed than through words. And so, music is indeed full of sound and fury, but instead signifies everything. Thank you.